Hi everyone, just checking in with you. This is our last lecture of the semester. Woo! So we're going to talk about symbioses and some kind of misinterpretations of this term, which is what this middle part of the haiku is about, is that a symbiosis can refer to many different types of interactions. So usually I would ask you what a symbiosis is, and I would crowdsource your opinions, and then we would talk about that. You can break down the word, as we often do when we're trying to figure out what something means. Symbiosis. So sym is shared and bio is life. So symbiosis is a shared life. So we have two species living together, two different species at least, for better or for worse. Symbiosis is often thought to mean a positive interaction where both species gain something. However, a symbiosis can be parasitic or it can be commensal. So there's this whole spectrum of how these interactions can play out. But if you have two or more species, they're different species, right? You can't be within the same species and have a symbiosis. Then it's just considered cooperation or competition. But it involves multiple species living in close quarters in some way dependent on each other. So there's three categories for symbiosis. We can have parasitism, commensalism, or mutualism. So thinking about parasitism and thinking about this continuum of interactions we can have. If we assign each partner a either benefit or detriment or nothing, right? What's their sort of net received input from this relationship? So if we have parasitism, then we have one partner getting a positive, so we'll consider that +1, and the other partner is negatively impacted by that interaction, so we'll consider that -1. So if we add these together, it's 0, right? So parasitism, oh, these got all messed up when I changed it from PowerPoint. So this should be 1 and this should be 2. So parasitism would fall here at 0. So this would be, if you have a disease, some organism is living inside you, eating your tissues and causing you to have these negative symptoms, right? They give you a fever. That would be a parasite that lives inside you, feeds off of your tissues, and you suffer because of that. In a commensalism, one partner gets a net benefit, so we'll say +1, and the other partner isn't really affected. And so we have a 0. They might get some benefits and some negative impacts, but overall not really influencing their ability to survive and reproduce. So that's going to put us at 1. So commensalism kind of falls here in the middle, where we get one party benefiting in some way, but the other party isn't really affected. So there are smut fungi that live on your skin. There's tons of stuff that lives on your skin and many other organisms that live within your body and on your body. And those might just be getting some product from you, like these smut fungi that live on your skin are eating oils that your sebaceous glands produce. For most people, that doesn't really bother them. For some people, they'll get a little bit of skin irritation or maybe dandruff. But overall, not affecting your ability to survive and reproduce, but that other organism is dependent on you. So it needs you, but you're not really impacted by it. The other type of relationship, and the one that people most commonly conflate the term symbiosis with, is a mutualism. And this is where both parties get a net benefit. So, gosh, that's bugging me. If we have both parties benefiting, we get 1 + 1 is 2. So we're there at the very far end of the other spectrum. So here we have parasitism. This is in our sort of commensal range. Commensalism and mutualism. Whoop. So this set of interactions, you're not always going to fall strictly in parasitism or strictly in mutualism. Often you might be a mutualism that has a lot of parasitic components. So maybe we would rate it at like a 1.5 or something, but we're still here in this mutualism territory. So keep this continuum in mind as we talk about these different relationships, because sometimes it's very difficult to classify something solidly as a mutualism. parasitisms and commensalisms are a little bit more clear. So for each of the stories I'm going to present you, try to classify it on the Parasitism-Mutualism continuum. Try to figure out how great is the harm versus any kind of benefit that might be received. And when you're thinking about this, don't just think about discomfort. Think about the ability to survive and reproduce. Is it impacting their ability to get food or to find mates or to live for a long time or long enough to reproduce? The first symbiosis story that we'll look at is Permaculture. So this is maybe not really a real word. Merm indicates something about ants. And culture, you're thinking agriculture. So how are ants performing agriculture? There are at least 230 different species of attine ants that harvest pieces of leaves from plants in South America, Central America, and some areas of the southern US. So these are commonly called leaf cutter ants. And you can see them walking around here, and they'll be in these long trains, each of them carrying this piece of leaf that they've cut out. The ants take the leaves back to their underground nests, providing fertilizer for their true food source, Leucoagaricus gangliophorus. I don't actually know how to say that. I've only read it. So these ants aren't actually eating these leaves. They are spending most of the day going out foraging for these leaves and then bringing them back to their underground nest to then feed them to their fungus. The basidiomycete fungus is often a strain specific to the ant species and grows saprophytically on leaf litter. So the fungus eats the leaf litter, and usually, depending on this species of ant, you'll have a specific strain of this particular fungus. So they are farming a fungus underground. The ants maintain their fungal garden by providing the leaf substrate, fertilizing it, and removing wastes. So you can see here in the diagram, and I love this diagram, the ants will fertilize it with their poop. There's this fecal droplet, and these little red dots in here indicate enzymes that are able to break down that leaf litter. So the enzymes are carried in the ant poop. They go into the leaf pulp that the ant has broken up. So all of this gets mixed together in the fungal garden, and then those enzymes make it back into these structures called, I don't actually know how to say this word, ganglidia is how I'm going to say it. So in return, the fungus makes these strange structures rich in carbohydrates and lipids called ganglidia. Ganglidia, maybe? Ganglidia? Very possible. So these are what the ants actually eat, and they feed them to their larvae. So the whole expedition out to go collect those leaf sources and bring them back, which puts them in danger because then they can be attacked by predators and cost them a lot of energy because they're out, traveling and carrying these large pieces of the leaves around. So all of that is to grow their true food source, which contains carbohydrates and lipids, these ganglidia. And throughout this whole process, the enzymes are constantly being cycled. So the enzymes required to break down this leaf substrate go from the fungus to the ant, into the poop, that goes back to the leaf, and into the fungus again. None of the fungal strains that are found within the ant nests have been found outside of the ant nests. So this is a highly specialized growing structure. It's not that there's some wild fungus that they then bring in and start their garden, or find it growing wild and start their nest around it. It is a very purposeful cultivation process that these ants are doing. When new queens, called founders' queens, leave the nest, they take fungal inoculum, so just a chunk of the fungal hyphae, with them in their mouths to begin the garden for the new nest. This means that most of the fungi are asexually propagated, and it's possible that these clonal lineages are several million years old. As with any monoculture, the particular fungus that they're growing is susceptible to infection by ascomycetes in the genus Escovopsis. So anytime you are growing just one thing, if something specializes at attacking that thing, you are sort of selecting for that specialized pathogen, right? And we know this based on the way that we grow crops and why we're not supposed to have monocultures, because they are more susceptible to invasive diseases or even native diseases that you've made more abundant by providing more of their host source in this localized area. Around 25% of the gardens in a Panamanian ant colony contain the Symbiosis, which feed on the fungal cultivar and can destroy fungal gardens, leading to the collapse of the colony. So we have these underground fungal gardens, and about a quarter of them contain this intensive pathogen that's capable of wiping out the whole garden and collapsing that ant colony because it's their only food source. So we have a confined, humid environment. We have a connected, genetically similar food source. Why is there no ant famine? How are there 230 successful species of this type of ant if we have perfect conditions for a blight on all of their fungal garden, right? If we were doing this as humans, we would expect that food source to be entirely wiped out and we'd have to develop a new strain of it. There's no way that it's going to survive for millions of years, because those are the perfect conditions to grow fungus, because that's what they're doing. They're growing fungus. So what's going on in this situation? Each species of attine ants has its own strain, or possibly multiple strains, of filamentous bacteria called actinomycetes. And that mycetes term should tell you something fungal-like. So it's a bacteria that grows filamentously. These actinomycetes produce antimicrobial compounds that inhibit the parasitic fungus as well as other competing microbes. So if you look at this picture of this ant, you can see little white powder all over. So see all this white stuff? That is on and in the cuticle, which is also called the integument of the ant. So we have this sort of layer of actinomycetes that are growing on and around this ant, who is then walking all over this fungal garden and tending to it. So the antimicrobial compounds that are being produced on that ant are then being spread around over the garden. This is a wonderful infographic that highlights the importance of actinomycetes in these ecosystems where attine ants exist. So actinomycetes, with regard to ant immunity, provide leafcutter ants some immunity to other fungal pathogens and mites by production of this compound, valinomycin. Whenever you see one of these little T symbols, that means like this compound over here inhibits this, right? So valinomycin inhibits this pathogen, which could be a fungus or a mite. It's kind of a broad spectrum antibiotic, I guess, or anti-pathogenic. And then the pathogen, if it were not stopped by this valinomycin, would then have this sort of regulatory capacity on the ants, right? So that is just this example of some blocking or regulatory factor. So we can also see that actinomycetes have regulation on fungal pathogens. So the difference between this bubble and the ant immunity bubble is that these fungal pathogens are pathogens to the fungal garden. So this compound, which I'm not even going to try to say, has inhibitory effects on fungal pathogens, Symbiosis, the one that we know attacks our particular Leucoagaricus, which then has inhibitory effect on the Leucoagaricus. We can also consider ants as being maybe a nice place for actinomycetes to live. So other actinomycetes might be able to outcompete the actinomycetes that make the antimicrobials that we need, right? So they have niche defense, so they have compounds that can protect their kind of ability to colonize the ant by outcompeting other actinomycetes. So they're producing compounds that are also toxic to other actinomycetes so that they can maintain their sort of dominance over that ant and then be producing those antimicrobials to protect the fungal garden. All right, on to the last bit. So all of that combined maintains this ant fungus Parasitism-Mutualism so that we can have this underground fungal garden. And what that does is maintains a large percent of the carbon cycle that's happening in these ecosystems. So 17% of the carbon-rich material, I'm not sure if it's just 17% of the leaves on these trees, foliage-wise, goes to those ants, which then get broken down in this sort of rapid decomposition because they're broken down physically by the ants with their mouth parts, and then they're broken down chemically by the fungus and directly deposited into the soil because they're already underground. It's also a hot, wet environment, so the breakdown of those materials is very rapid. And so the turnover of these nutrients is very rapid because of this actinomycete leaf fungus interaction with that carbon-rich material. So that was a lot of interaction, right? We have this sort of it's more than tripartite. We have many different interacting components of our symbiosis. So we have the leafcutter ants. We have the fungal food, which I think was Leucoagaricus. Hopefully I didn't say that wrong, so I don't have to go and correct all of these. We also have the fungal parasite, which I guess I'm leading a bit with that terminology, Symbiosis. We have the actinomycetes. And these would be whatever species are producing the antimicrobials to the Escovopsis. And the other big thing we have in this relationship are the trees that are providing that food source. So we can try to go through and quantify who is benefiting from this relationship. And we have many different symbioses going on here because there is a parasitism here between this Escovopsis and this Leucoagaricus. We have one benefiting at the other's expense. And with these actinomycetes, this one perhaps benefits at the expense of this one by producing those antimicrobial compounds to suppress that fungus. So we at least have some negative interaction there. With the leafcutter ants and the trees, the leafcutter ants benefit and the trees would initially suffer, right? Because they are losing this photosynthetic product that they made, right? They're trying to do photosynthesis with those leaves. Any loss of leaves by a tree is, at least initially, quite negative. Ecosystem-wise, that carbon is going to be rapidly cycled and it's going to allow for potentially a higher level of biodiversity within that ecosystem by keeping potentially dominant trees from taking over that area, right? So it'll open up light gaps and provide a very rich, nutrient-dense soil. So for the particular trees and plants that are losing their leaves, right, that is a parasitism of the leaf on those trees. However, ecosystem-wise, it is going to be potentially positive for those plants. We can also look at this relationship here, where we would have a mutualism between the leafcutter ants and the fungus. Because even though the ants are eating the fungus, that fungus is producing specific structures that those ants can eat, and they're not eating the vegetative part of the fungus. They're just eating these structures that are produced by the fungus that aren't part of this sort of growing body. So there's a positive relationship there because the leafcutter ants are then taking that fungus and reproducing it and protecting it, right? So they are growing that fungus. But they don't allow it to reproduce itself. They control its genetics by continually making these asexual clones. And then here, actinomycetes for the ants, we get a positive because the actinomycetes get a place to live. I'm not sure, I don't think they feed on the ants in any way, maybe on some kind of compounds produced by the ants. And then the leafcutter ants get protection for their fungal garden. Many complex relationships, and this is why ecosystems are amazing because they're complicated and you have to understand every part of them to be able to think about how they function, right? So I always encourage people to go into ecosystem science because your mind will be blown continually, but it's not a great place if you want to have a solid answer. So permaculture, maybe not a real word, but it is a real thing. So here's one of our ants covered in actinomycetes on its fungal garden. And over here we have an ant that looks like it's sucking juice out of the butt of an aphid, and that is exactly what it's doing. You can see its little, I'm going to call these hands, its little front arms here. What it's doing is it's like rubbing this aphid, and that rubbing of the aphid stimulates it to release more honeydew. So this aphid is piercing this plant, it's parasitizing the plant and taking sugars from the phloem. But as it does that, it is continually releasing some of that product as well. And it does that in this bubble of liquid that comes out of, I don't know, its anus. I don't know what kind of parts that bugs have. There's some of my ignorance for you. So the ants will tend these aphids and protect them from other predators like ladybugs that might then eat the aphids. And they will also go rub them to stimulate them to be releasing more honeydew. The ants suck that sugary fluid out of their butts or whatever they are and eat. So they're basically tending their cattle.